There were some people when I started, some law firms, some title companies that said, man, I'd love to be those guys someday. And some of those people went to jail.
So he texts me, he says, hey, I just did like this user interview. Wow, this seems kind of predatory.
When I started to see checks being cut for $40,000 or $50,000 for a mortgage broker commission, I think we all said, oh, wait a minute here. Is there something going on?
So that seemed like a good idea at the time. It was one of the worst financial decisions I've ever made. Hello, and welcome to the Seem Like a Good Idea podcast. I'm your host, Mike Russo, and this is where I dive into the key decisions that shape the careers of some of the world's top executives, entrepreneurs, and investors, exploring the outcomes of ideas that seem great at the time. Today, I'm excited to be joined by Scott Kriss. Scott is the CEO of Kriss Law, an Atlantic closing based in Massachusetts. Scott's firms are the largest purchase closing companies in America and operate in all 50 U.S. states. Scott, welcome to the show.
Good morning, Mike. Thanks for having me.
How are you doing today?
I'm doing well.
So maybe to just get us started is just give us a brief intro in the audience about you, right? 20 years is a long time in this business for sure.
It is. I certainly didn't see myself doing this for 20 years, but that seems to happen. I've been practicing law for almost 25 years. Opened up Kriss Law in 2004. Have grown from there. We then formed Atlantic Closing and Escrow a few years after that to expand out of New England. And since then, we've grown, fairly quickly, but also what we think is smartly. We now operate in all 50 states. We do a combination of residential and commercial closing, so certainly heavy on the residential side.
Maybe start with not 24 years ago, let's start actually 24 years ago. So you started, in 2000, right? 1 year before 9/11.
I was in law school at the time, but I was working for a closing attorney. So that's how I sort of got into it. So I think I passed the bar in 02 or 03. So, we're getting pretty close to that number now.
And did you have a passion for real estate coming out of law school, or it just it seemed like a good idea at the time?
I went to law school because I had a passion for not getting a job after college. I don't know if that counts. But yeah, I certainly, no, I didn't have a passion for real estate. But at the time, if you remember, that was, we were sort of in the heat of maybe, what can be considered the first real refi boom, which eventually, of course, led to not great things. But the most jobs coming out of law school at that point were in the real estate space. And me being someone who didn't really have a passion for law, so to speak, I fell into it, but I love it. I actually do enjoy it.
So that brings up an interesting question, because you see all these people online today, right? You see these kids, they're real kids to you and I, and they're like, man, if I was around in 08, I would have been buying up everything in sight, right?
Yeah.
And that seemed like a good idea to no one, right?
Right.
But going back slightly further of you starting the firm, or you're doing all these refis, and you're really on the front lines of the paperwork coming through.
Yep.
In the using the basis of seemed like a good idea, were you sitting there at these closings saying this does not seem like a good idea?
Luckily, we worked with primarily lenders that didn't get too deep into the whole subprime, crazy product, no income, no asset verification stuff. That said, I saw some crazy things. There were some people when I started, some law firms, some title companies that said, man, I'd love to be those guys someday. And some of those people went to jail. So, I think that like anything else in luck, in life and business, it's partially luck, it's partially gravitating to the right people. But I saw some things, when I started to see checks being cut for $40,000 or $50,000 for a mortgage broker commission, I think we all said, oh, wait a minute here, is there something going on? And I certainly wasn't shocked when the AmeriQuests and all that stuff started to come to light, because we did see that out there as well.
That's insane. I've never even heard that.
We saw, $600,000-$700,000 loans, people charging 4 points on the back, 4 points on the front. It adds up pretty quickly. And, even bigger loans and, broker fees and yield spreads on top of that. I mean, it was, the consumer certainly was not protected. I think we were all afraid when the CFPB came in, but it was massively necessary following what happened.
I got to tell you, so my son he was doing, I set him up. I'm like, hey, we use this thing called user interviews. Like, it's a good way to make side cash. Like, you can do it at night. You make $75 for 30 minutes of your time. You should try it. So he texted me the other day, and I won't say the name of the company, but let's just say it's a company that deals in personal finance, and their name is on a big stadium, right? And we see lots of commercials, right? So he texts me, he says, hey, I just did like this user interview. Like, wow, this seems kind of predatory, he says to me. Right? And so, and that's the, if you look back, and I think those of us in our generation, we went through 2 big market corrections pretty early, right? So you were like in law school, would you say 2000, right?
I think I graduated law school in 2002. So
okay, so right in there though. Thank God you were in law school, because we went through a massive market correction, right? And then we went through another in 2008, right? So one of the things that I'm really living right now is we'll term as like the seemed like a good idea. So after 2008 and in 2011, I moved from Aspen to Massachusetts, right? And I got this block of money for my kids for their college education. And I'm looking at it saying, this money has earned nothing, right? So I'm going to stick it in the state U plan, because at least then it'll, like, I'm buying tuition early, right? So that seemed like a good idea at the time. It was one of the worst financial decisions I've ever made, right? Because had I stuck that money and left it in the market, every kid could have went to a Boston college and have no debt, right?
No debt, right?
Like,
sure.
Like, instead, it's like enough to pay for them to go to UMass, right? Which is still an amazing gift, right? But like, it's. So how about in those 20 years, was there anything that you tried, right, that you were like, this seems like a good idea, I'm going for it, but for whatever reason, it didn't turn out to be?
I think you said we only have a half an hour, so I don't know if you're going to have enough time to go through all the mistakes I've made. But certainly one thing is aggressive growth business-wise. You when you're young and, you look back on all these things when you're right out of college or law school, high school, whatever, and you can't believe that you, first of all, had the gall to do these things. But, we definitely, when I said, hey, we're going to, we want to compete with the big boys, we're going to be national. Well, we spent a lot of time and money, learning lessons, whether it's hiring the wrong people, spending too much money on licensing, spending too much money on licensing in a certain jurisdiction where, the license came far before the business did. So there's a million things I've done, business-wise. And then I think probably the biggest mistakes I've made is, I consider myself, I grew up, pretty middle class, some pretty, I'll use street smart, I certainly didn't, I saw a lot of stuff growing up. My parents owned small businesses. I invested in a lot of startups because that was, the buzzword as apps came along, and, without really ever properly vesting things. And much like you, if I had just put that money in real estate, which subsequently I've invested in a lot, or just put it in a CD or, in the market, it certainly would have done a lot better at this point than
startup investing.
Yeah. Everyone, you have these guys with stars in their eyes, and if they're good salespeople, I got caught up, and you regret that stuff.
What, do you mind sharing what one of those was? You don't even have to say the name of the company.
Sure. Yeah. One of the bigger things I invested in was actually real estate adjacent. So I felt like, I think everything I've done has been real estate adjacent. So I think I probably use that as a crutch to say, oh, I know this space. It was and this was late 2000s, late aughts, whatever you call it. And it was an app that you could type in where you were, and maybe there was, GPS tracking at that time. And it showed you sort of all the real estate around you that was for sale, that was pending, that had closed recently, but then also, the bars, the restaurants. It was an early, things have come so far since then, but it looked really cool. And I said, boy, this is neat. This is going to be something. And the person who sold it to me is a bright guy and had a good idea. It just didn't catch on. And, this particular person had big name investors, big name VC guy, a guy who owned a sports franchise. I mean, people bought into it, which of course, grows the viability of the whole thing. It just didn't work out. I mean, I actually think it still exists, but, I don't think anything's going to really come of it at this point. And that's the other thing I've learned. And, you sort of mentioned this when we were talking. It seems like these startups, especially in the tech space, if they don't hit really quickly, every day that passes, the viability of it decreases.
Yeah, I mean, it's a grind. I had somebody say the opposite to me of like success. One thing that was common around successful entrepreneurs was how long they stuck with the grind.
Interesting.
Right. And so, and I actually say this to my old partner, Chad Roffers from Concierge Auctions, which is, I left, him and my other partner bought me out in 2017. And mostly because we just didn't see eye to eye on where the business was going, and mostly on the speed of which it was going there. Right.
Sure.
So they wanted to sort of, like you were telling, like overinvest. We were overinvesting. In fact, it was, and I'm like, this is too fast. Right. And that's what, led to us, deciding like, hey, I'm out, I'm going to do something else. It was great. We're still great friends. But they went on and the companies continued to grow. But at the time, the book Shoe Dog about Phil Knight came out.
Yeah. Great book.
And I said to Chad, I go, listen, if you go by and you look at them or Apple or some of these like really great companies, it took 20 years before they even started to get started, right? Where like the ramp really started, right? And their company now, it's been acquired and it's growing and what have you, but like they're 18 years in.
I'll just say, in hearing that, I guess I need to all these years, I've thought, oh, these tech startups, it's really, it's got to be good. It's got to be hot. But maybe it was the team that wasn't really willing to continue the grind. That's a point I've never really thought of.
Yeah. Well, and there's an opportunity cost to the team, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So here we are. It's September 2024, and we're in this like wake of like the NAR settlement to the DOJ lawsuit. Well, really wasn't their lawsuit. It was this guy that now just started his own startup for real estate showings, which is, I don't know if it's comical or brilliant, but like one of the things that I thought of is going also to the grind is Rex Realty, right? Like when Rex came out, it was like, hey, we're going to sell your house for 2%. We can source people ourselves. We don't need buyer's agents. We don't need the MLS. So some people could say it seemed like a good idea at the time and didn't work out. Or like, in your opinion, was it like, no one could foresee this. So, but like when you saw it, I'm sure you knew about it, right? Like, was this something that seemed like a good idea or you didn't think it was a good idea?
Well, I think that the biggest disservice being done by all of this stuff, and it's natural, you have an industry that really drives our whole economy, being, real estate. It's the quote unquote American dream. You want to buy a house, you want to buy real estate. I think the disservice is saying that people don't need help, that you can just go online and find it. And, my question always, because I do this, I'm in the trenches every day. Who's going to do the work that buyer's agent has done forever? You say, well, you'll do, the attorney will do this and the title company will do this and the lender will do that. Well, then our fees are going to increase. We don't work for free. And, the lender, certainly rates will go up because they have to charge more. So, the media narrative from all the way back to Rex to currently that, you don't need buyer agency. We have Zillow or whatever it is a disservice, especially to first-time home buyers, who are going to end up in the wrong house. They're going to pay too much. They're not going to get the protection. It's not like they're buying a $400 flat screen TV, especially where we live in Massachusetts, which the median price right now is $650, and that's factoring in a lot of low end, obviously. Everyone's spending $1 million, and you have to have some guidance. And we're certainly not going to step on realtors' toes. They're our friends, they're our clients, but also we know how valuable buyer agency is. So I think that a big part of, and I've educated over 100,000 agents and lenders on the suit in the last 12 to 14 months, is we have to get out there to the consumer and say, listen, this narrative is not true. Are there buyer's agents who just collect the check and, didn't do anything? Sure. There's lawyers who do that. There's doctors but 9 times out of 10, I'm going to say, a buyer's agent makes a difference, and they serve a purpose that who is going to pick up that slack? So now the consumer's, they're going to go unrepresented and not pay a buyer's agent. Well, now they're going to pay me more, because, or me and my team more, because we're doing these things down the road, or the lender saying, well, we can help you with all these things and, clarify this and that, and I'll help you with this. But, the rate's going to go up by a point. So somebody's going to, they're going to pay somebody for this service, and to say that it's a waste of time and money it's just simply incorrect. And it's, it's something that, it's something that has to get out there, that's not really the case.
I hadn't thought about that. I mean, I will tell you that honestly, I've been one of those people in my entrepreneur mindset is like, how come we don't have lawyers taking on more of the transaction, especially here in Massachusetts? So I'm only licensed personally in 4 different states, right? I'm licensed here, Connecticut, New York, and Colorado, right? I've transacted real estate in 26 states and 17 countries. And so here, what I don't like, and Connecticut, New York, it's all sort of the same in New England, is you don't have a standardized contract, right? You do in Texas, you do in Colorado, right? They're produced by the state. Now, are those easy contracts? No, they're actually not. And so, but here, for example, I helped a friend buy a house in Cape Cod. I actually don't take legal risk. So what's something that happens a lot where agents, I think brokerages take on too much risk, right? So this particular case, and I've had it in multiple cases, where the buyer says, well, I don't need a lawyer because the mortgage bank is providing a lawyer. I'm like, no, that's not your lawyer. That's their lawyer. Right. And so, listen, I will, if you don't want to pay them, because I also will not draft a purchase contract for you. That's actually, there is no standard purchase contract, even though they say there is in Massachusetts, right? Everybody sort of uses the same thing. It's not standard. It's not produced by anyone, right? So I say, when you go to purchase contract, you're going to have a lawyer. I'm not acting as your attorney. And if you don't want to pay one, I'm so serious about it, I will pay for it for you up to $750, right?
Smart.
Because I don't want that risk.
So it's funny. Everyone handles this differently, whether it's jurisdictionally, whether it's geographical. So, in Massachusetts, for example, we draft the P&S in a lot of areas, but in Southeastern Mass, in Western Mass, the agent uses a form, and then we add this rider that is ballooned to 11 pages. To me, the best way to do it is the way it's done in most states, where there's a standard form that certainly you want to have an attorney take care of, but we continue to reinvent the wheel in Massachusetts, and a lot of it is justification of attorney fees, in all honesty. It doesn't need to be as complicated as we've made it. I think a combination of the way it's done in Maryland, for example, where it's a standard form, you write in some of the particulars, have an attorney look at it. If you need to make changes, great. But in Massachusetts, where we now, have this, I think our firm rider is now 7 pages. The seller side, attaches a rider if they're, if we're on the buy side. It's just become out of control. But that said, you're absolutely right. Of course you need it's a legal document. You need a lawyer to look at it. Now, in title states, I'll use New Hampshire, for example. It's very rare that an attorney ever looks at it. whether you feel comfortable with your agent doing it, but, certainly don't disagree with your take is you got to have an attorney look at it. We're fine with that. There's a happy medium between the two, I think, between justifying all these attorney fees and saying, hey, this is a pretty simple transaction with a simple form, but you want to have someone with a legal mind look at it.
So it's interesting to go back again to what you said about someone's paying somewhere, right?
Yeah.
So as I said, I've also transacted real estate in 17 different countries, right? That includes Bahamas. So it includes Bahamas, it includes England, it includes Italy, it includes France. So these other countries like England, for example, where somebody goes directly to the listing agent, they're paying higher fees for solicitors is what they're called, right? In Italy, the buyer pays a percentage of I haven't been there since, pre-2017, but they paid 1.5 points to the attorney that was the buyer's attorney to close the transaction. Now, I will tell you, I think in most of those countries, transactions are actually more complicated, right? Because they don't have the systems that we have. So the research that goes in, making sure there's good title, are you buying what you think you're buying? It actually is real work, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So just staying on this line and a couple more questions here. As you are sitting there and educating 100,000 agents, which is amazing, and still looking back, what do you think their challenge, right? Of it's hey, it might, I'll even pose the question. It might seem like a good idea that you have to get a buyer's agency signed and that you're going to ask somebody to sign for 6 months that's going to pay your fee, right? Versus they can go to a Zillow agent and get a no fee, let me in the door and let them sell themselves.
Right.
Right. So maybe just which idea, which one seems like a good idea and which would, if you were talking to your 100,000 agents, what would you tell them?
Well, I think that there's so many different ways to slice this. And, the problem in my industry, and next time we talk, we can get into AOLs, which are attorney opinion letters, that title insurance there's entities out there that want title insurance to disappear. So that's something that will factor into this. But it's really, there's never been a one size fits all in our industry, whether it's, real estate, my industry, the title industry. The thing I can say about your question in Central Ohio might differ from, Wellesley, Massachusetts, where the median sale price is, 1.3, because there's different challenges with those things. There's different laws, there's different ways each jurisdiction transacts business, both, traditionally and under whatever changes are coming. So to me, again, I don't care if you're spending $40,000 in a condo in Oklahoma. That $40,000 to that person is probably all the money they have, and you need to protect that. So to me, having someone that's educated on the process, some will say we're dinosaurs, probably, Mike, that we say, what do you mean you can't just go online? All the information's there and the pictures are there. There's a difference from knowing, how it works, knowing the process, and certainly knowing what and where you're buying, that a human still makes a difference on. And again, it's not buying, a $400 TV. It's a big purchase in everyone's lives. And to me, it's a no-brainer to have that help. So it's a complicated, convoluted answer.
In my entrepreneur spirit, before I started Spark Offer, I started a brokerage called Participate, where the seller could do entry only, I'd put it on the MLS for $299. They could have a $1,500 flat fee where I guided them, did one open house, but the rest was remote. And then full service, more like Redfin, 1% list fee. So I take this listing in Worcester for a triplex. This definitely falls under seemed like a good idea, but it wasn't, right?
Yep.
And so the house goes under contract. The homeowner said, hey, we had a pipe break upstairs. It's been repaired. The ceiling won't be repaired. But so I figured on the walkthrough, they would see this. So I didn't like go to the buyer's agent. It was my mistake and say, hey, like this happened. The bigger mistake really fell on the buyer's agent, even though like I wound up getting, having to deal with the issue. They go to do the final walkthrough before they close that day. The seller does it. I'm not present, right? Seemed like a good idea. Definitely wasn't. She doesn't walk them through the bottom unit because she tells them she doesn't have the key. They go and close. They got a loan. It's not cash. They go and close. And this is again where the buyer didn't have his own attorney. He had a bank attorney, right? That no one came and said like, hey, we didn't actually see the whole place.
Right.
So the next day I get a video sent to me online of like water like flowing, right, from the buyer's agent.
Yep.
And I go, what is that? And he said, it's from the tenant. They said like they're living in a hotel and this is what happened when that pipe broke.
Jeez.
And I said, so like now there's all this damage in this apartment. I said, whoa, you didn't see it on the walkthrough? And he goes, no, we didn't do. She said she didn't have the key. And I'm like, and you let them close? Right? Like, are you insane? Right? So what I learned from that experience of what seemed like a good idea is two things. One is never, ever, ever, as a listing agent, not attend a walkthrough. Ever.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I don't care how low your fee is. Because the E&O company told me that even though I wrote an agreement that said, like, I'm only responsible for X, they're like, you can't actually contract away liability for your broker as a brokerage. So I shut the whole thing down.
It's one of those things, again, that everyone has paid. There was this misnomer forever, and part of the reason we are where we are is that a buyer's agent was free. That's not true. The seller just always sort of automatically, and another reason we're in this position in an antitrust lawsuit was because it was quote unquote automatic, that no one had a choice, that it was free. Well, it was never free because, the buyer's agent was getting paid by the seller. And there's a reason for that. And I'll go back to that same point, whether it's a listing agent, buyer's agent, there's always these tasks that need to be completed on every real estate transaction. If there's not a buyer's agent doing them, you are probably going to end up paying more, whether you end up in a dual agency situation, paying the listing agent, whether, things change and you're paying a lender to do things that are, in the past have been done by a buyer's agent, whether you're paying the attorney to do that, which again, we want to avoid at all costs because we don't want to do that stuff. We don't know how to look at an inspection report. We don't do these things. We don't want to step on the toes of our clientele, of the people who know what they're doing. Just like we don't want a realtor telling us, how to write legal language or whatever it may be. So, there is that work needs to get done in order for a transaction to be completed and completed correctly. And the way that a buyer's agent, especially a good buyer's agent, does it is really great, really efficient. And, there's a reason that position has existed for so long, for sure.
So last thing, and it's not a question, right? It's more of a clarification, right? As I told you before we started the podcast, I've seen people saying online that the laws have changed and therefore buyers have to operate this certain way because we've had these national law changes, right? And what I'm really would love for you to clear up is this is going to be online. Consumers are going to see it. I hope to God, 1 million people see it, right? Yep. What would you say to them of to be clear and not be susceptible to misinformation?
Well, first of all, if 1 million people see this, we're going to have to talk about my compensation that is zero currently. So I think the biggest thing is, one, there are no law changes as of now. This is case law, which certainly is something we have to follow. It's the information we have. A lot of people said to me, we don't know anything. Well, this is the information we have. There's a lot of gray areas we have to follow. So that's number one. Number two, we have realtors going on social media or whatever, and they're saying, these are the new rules or these are the new laws, as you said, and, this is how it's going to be. Well, we don't totally know that yet because we have the DOJ guidance on one case, the MLS PIN case, and then the DOJ has also said we're going to offer guidance on the Sitzer-Burnett settlement, which is now the controlling case law we have in the industry. So number one, I think it's really important for realtors to be saying the right thing. Hey, we're operating under Sitzer-Burnett, but just know that until this is finalized, which right now it's a November date, we don't really know. We don't know how either judge in either case is going to interpret that DOJ guidance. So that's number two. And then, of course, number three is the DOJ could, that both judges could say, we don't believe in the DOJ guidance. We don't think it's helpful. And I agree, by the way. I think the DOJ guidance is draconian and sort of tone deaf and could really affect our economy should it be adopted. But the DOJ could then suggest that law does change. They could get, somebody in the legislature involved and actually come up with a new law that says, it's illegal for sellers to cover buyer agency fees, which would, decimate our industry and decimate the economy. So the bottom line is, I think we have, because there's such a large amount of distrust in the real estate industry by the consumer now, partially warranted, I'd say, a small part, but mostly because of this media narrative with people talking about a business they don't understand, that it's really important that if you are speaking publicly from any aspects of the real estate world, you have to make sure you're completely factual. Because if tomorrow, if one of these people says in social media, this is what it is, new law Sitzer-Burnett, and then tomorrow a judge comes out and says, well, we really like what the DOJ is saying, here's what we think. Well, now you're going to look foolish. And I think we can't have that right now in our industry, because we're fighting this narrative that says buyer agency is a waste of time, which obviously I completely disagree with.
That's a great answer. Lastly, before we wrap up, is, I just want to thank you. Like, this was a great amount of time, and you've been an awesome guest. And, I can't wait to actually meet you in person in the future. You're far too close.
Yeah, great.
And there's lots to talk about for the future.
If you could just remind my family in my house and I'm an awesome guest, that'd be helpful. Sometimes they don't think it. So.
Yeah, I get it.